1970. ECOS was actually officially created in 1971, but the impetus for it came from 1970. And as you, I'm sure, recall, that was a major year in terms of the environment with Earth Day 1, the Clean Air Act, the formation of EPA. All those things took place, and they were also having an impact, not only on the nation, but on Sacramento and the community.
Sacramento, although in the early 70s, we were maybe number 35 in size of metropolitan area, we were in the top 10 for air pollution. Air pollution was worse then. It led to the Federal Clean Air Act that was passed later that year and many other important legislation. To deal with air pollution, we had to have more infill development rather than the sprawl development that was happening in this region. To say that to deal with to get the cleaner air that the Clean Air Act calls for, we need to change the way that we're growing.
I got involved with ECOS in the middle 80s, actually early 80s, because of the constant rezones that the city was doing to South Natomas and the planning of North Natomas without changing the plans in South Natomas to accommodate that.
I started volunteering as a board member in 1991 and served almost continuously on the board up till the end of 2022.
I became involved initially because I attended an Earth Day 1 event at UC Davis. And that convinced me that I should leave working for the Peace Corps, which I did at the time, and go into the environmental movement.
In my practice, I ended up discovering that I was doing these zero energy homes many, many years ago, passively heated and cooled for people. And it was originally for hippies and then rich people. And these were people that were commuting 50 miles to their jobs every day. And finally, a bell went off in my head and I said, oxymoron. Okay, this is not really sustainable.
I think I came to know about ECOS through a couple of really important things that it did in its history, and that was the advocacy against rice burning, right, which had just an incredibly visible and olfactory impact on the region to end that practice. That was a game changer for Sacramento, in terms of our air quality. And then later in the 80s, the closure of the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant set SMUD as an organization on a completely different path to develop sources of renewable and more environmentally sound sources of power here in our region.
Well, by background, I'm a scientist, so I want to find out what the realities are, how the world functions. I did research that increasingly was environmentally concerned, and I was wondering why no one seemed to pay attention to the research results.
I got involved in reviewing what ECOS was up to in my participation in the Motherlode Chapter Sierra Club Conservation Committee. The controversy associated with flood control for Sacramento got hot. It was hot when I moved to town because it was 1 year after the near flooding of a lot of the city and the flooding of part of the city in 1986.
Being involved in ECOS just grew out of my interest in clean air. And I was asked by the American Lung Association of Sacramento Immigrant Trails, now BREATHE, to represent Modern Transit Society on the ECOS board. Perfect fit. I loved it.
It was probably the early 90s, 1992, when I first ran for the city council. I vaguely remember going before ECOS for an endorsement interview. Among the big issues was whether or not we should be building more housing downtown.
I first became involved with ECOS not as a member or as a participant, but really as part of my responsibilities in long-range planning with the Sacramento County Planning Department, particularly with respect to the development of the 1993 general plan.
So back in 2004, 2005, I started an effort with a few other like-minded people to create a group to protect sandhill crane habitat in the county. We decided early on as a group that it would be a good idea for us to leverage our efforts by joining another umbrella group. And ECOS was the obvious one.
One is the entire issue dealing with sustainability and livability of being pro-infill and anti-sprawl. That, of course, leads to our concerns and efforts in terms of trying to save the open space, the habitat, the farmland. After all, we are the breadbasket for the world. We are the Pacific Flyway. We have a global role here as well as a local and a regional role.
Accomplishments of ECOS were first their success in overturning or beating down the McEwen development proposal for this Stone Lakes development in the early 1970s.
My friend Peter Calthorpe and a group of others, Andres Duaney from Florida and a bunch of other people, were forming the Congress for New Urbanism. And we had published this paper that had a heavy influence on what their approach was. It had had a lot of influence on the environmental community, and now it is kind of pro forma in the environmental community that land use is the most important strategy for what we do.
We also convinced the county in the early 90s to develop urban limit lines.
We proposed as planners a very generous urban service boundary that allowed for plenty of development. And the main pitch was that would allow for proper planning of urban services and timely growth.
A policy in there that there had to be the votes of 4 members of the Board of Supervisors to violate the urban services boundary.
I'd say that was a major accomplishment too. There are right now projects that are beyond that urban limit line that are threatening. So we'll see how that develops. But
I was the head of the Natomas Community Association, and we were involved in several lawsuits against the city of Sacramento, some of which we settled, and the one in South Natomas we actually won. South Natomas was one of the first post-Prop 13 communities, and so we were being built for the revenue, but we were not receiving the services and facilities that other neighborhoods in Sacramento received.
At the time when I became president, in the middle of litigating around North Natomas and the Trojan horse of the arena. My predecessor, Mike Eaton, had initiated that lawsuit along with Jude Lamar.
Then we all had to regroup in 93 about what to do for flood control for Sacramento, while at the same time the Water Forum was also launching in 1993. And a new intensive regional look at water supply issues starting in 1993 and ultimately ending in the 2000 Water Forum Agreement, and now potentially a revised Water Forum Agreement for which ECOS is actively involved.
Okay, so the Natomas Basin HCP, probably the first HCP in our region, came into being about 1993 when the feds told SAFCA they could not do a major Natomas flood control project unless they agreed to do a habitat conservation plan to protect the state and federal endangered and threatened species in the basin. And SAFCA started off, soon handed it off to the city of Sacramento. And we in ECOS wanted to track that very closely. You know, we did win some big victories in that fight. The NBHCP is not a perfect plan, far from it. It's in fact dependent upon having farmland preserved forever that's in private hands in order to work. But we did win 3 major things. So we won all mitigation has to take place in the basin. All mitigation must be inland up front before development happens, not in a fee. The third thing we won was protection for Fisherman's Lake and a preserve south of the airport, south of I-5, and protecting Fisherman's Lake. So these were 3 major victories.
We've been through 30 years of progress on many projects, the most obvious ones being the completion of some brand new flood control gates at Folsom Dam, improvements to the levee systems, and also there are active projects right now to expand the Sacramento Weir and bypass, essentially let the floods from the American River slip silently and without much trouble into the Yolo bypass. Important event was the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. The author of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was Roger Dickinson to regulate groundwater in a sustainable manner.
ECOS was instrumental in working on issues related to the American River, both in terms of making sure that the municipal utility district took its straw out of the American River and stuck it in the Sacramento. I think the formation of the Parkway, as well as the ongoing efforts to support the American River Parkway, have been really important.
Part of the federal law around air quality legislation is that the transportation plan needs to be in conformance with the air quality plan. Well, it was nothing like that. So we sued.
According to federal law, that plan must not make air quality worse in a severe non-attainment, air pollution non-attainment area, such as Sacramento is.
SACOG going out as a result of our lawsuit to the general public to formulate the blueprint. But they conceived 3 different plans to put before the delegates that were involved in this blueprint process, and one of them was really an ECOS plan, and that's what ended up getting adopted as the blueprint. So McKeever was just wonderful.
Although we still have more sprawl than we would like, the percentage of housing and other development that is more closer in is far more than it would have been otherwise.
Finally, the project that I was involved in was the neighbors advocating for sustainable transportation. I think that was another really big milestone for ECOS because, you know, that was a lawsuit that resulted in improvements to the light rail system, the expansion of 50 for the carpool lanes, really galvanized people to get involved.
We did file a couple of lawsuits against Caltrans district involving US 50 expansion. In each case, we settled a lawsuit in which we got overall well over $10 million for Sacramento Regional Transit to double track the parallel light rail line between Folsom and Sacramento.
It also elevated the importance of greenhouse gas emissions because at the time, you know, Caltrans did a very sloppy job of analyzing the impacts of that project. And while the methods for doing that weren't crystal clear at the time, the judge agreed with ECOS and with the neighbors that they had to do a better job than they did.
So when I first joined, I worked with Habitat 2020 because that's what I was concerned about, was protecting habitat, particularly for cranes. My background is in biology, so I care about all species. And we had a big battle starting actually fairly quickly after I joined, which began in 2006, which was Elk Grove's effort to increase their sphere of influence by 10,000 acres. They were going to grow all the way down the Cosumnes River Preserve. The county had made it very clear they saw the South County as staying in agriculture permanently. And 7 years later, they shut the project down. And while this was all happening, the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan was still being written. It had started about 25 years ago from right now. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, if you're going to continue doing these kind of projects, you need to get a habitat conservation plan for the South County, or we're going to stop approving your projects.
We're not the usual first place that a concerned citizen would go to try to get involved and exercise influence or whatever. they would go to a lot of our member organizations. If you care about clean air, you might start with Breathe California. If you are concerned about climate change, you might want to go to a few groups here that deal with it. 350, Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Coalition, among others. And then if you're concerned about habitat, you might want to go to the Sierra Club as a starter.
I think that, ECOS is, in my opinion, the premier environmental organization in the Sacramento region. We have a voice and we use it effectively. The combination of organizations that are part of ECOS are all individually strong, but together we have an incredible weight to what we say.
ECOS is blessed that we serve the community that is the headquarters of state government. As a result, there are many more environmental professionals working in Sacramento County than in almost any other county of the state.
ECOS is not as much of a grizzly bear as it used to be. That's frank, all right?
ECOS gets respect because people and agencies know that we sue, but that means we usually don't have to sue for them to make sure they listen to us to do what needs to be done.
If anything, I would hope that ultimately we could get to a point where we are engaging in the decision-making process or the planning process, more particularly, more in advance of when it comes to making a decision about this development, that development, this plan or that plan.
In the future, in my opinion, sprawl is a thing. In my opinion, the environmental community focuses too much on the city of Sacramento. They are by far the best jurisdiction that we have.
Speaking from the habitat perspective, a problem we're really going to have to knuckle down on is the siting of renewables in a way that minimizes the impact to the environment.
I would hope that in the future, we could also look at the Sacramento River. There's a parkway there that is yet to be built, and then it's certainly as important for the region, both from a flood control capacity, as is the American, as well as the recreational opportunities, the habitat opportunities.
We've got a deep bench of folks who are familiar with Sacramento County issues, but our bench in the Water Forum Environmental Caucus does not cover El Dorado County or even Placer County well.
One thing that could be really beneficial is if we can inspire more individuals to elect, policymakers who are sympathetic and really do realize that supporting the environment does not mean you're ignoring people. And it's not a question of the economy or the environment.
One of the largest challenges that society faces in this region and throughout the state is the affordability of housing. We have been unsuccessful, strikingly unsuccessful, in solving this problem. There are times when I feel that government should take the bull by the horns and compete with the private sector in building housing. Because the private sector is not building the kinds of housing that this community or any community in the state needs.
We live in a constrained area. It's getting more constrained. And environmental issues are becoming far more intractable. I mean, we're really reaching a boiling point here.
I mentioned before how the founding goals were to save habitat and get cleaner air. But then also, as climate change became more obvious, that was the same thing that we needed to do to deal with climate change, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
How we grow matters. If we don't make climate and the way we think about our future around climate and quality of life our priority, the rest of it may not matter nearly as much.
I think we've had a very good record of deserving award recipients. Yeah, to give people recognition encourages them to move on and do bigger and better things.